The University Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia houses a small fragment of an ancient tablet under the catalog number CBS 8513. This piece of fired clay, measuring only about 4 by 6 inches, can easily fit in the palm of an adult's hand. Carved into its surface, faded by time, is a very precise geometric pattern consisting of several nested rectangular outlines. Right in the center of this complex architectural diagram lies a deep square depression, carefully pressed by the stylus of an unknown ancient scribe. Next to these austere lines are precise cuneiform characters that describe in detail the proportions of this strange central indentation. The artifact itself weighs no more than half a pound, but its information density surpasses that of many modern engineering documents. The cuneiform text surrounding the central square is neither a poem nor a religious hymn, but a strict set of construction specifications. The symbols specify the exact dimensions of this structure in ancient units of measurement, which the Sumerians called ninda. Next to the numerical values, a Sumerian sign is clearly legible, which phonetically denotes the word abzu, or deep reservoir. This tablet is a direct technical manual that prescribes the creation of a specific object with specified parameters. According to a literal translation from the Sumerian language, the depth of this central structure is exactly 20 ninda units. If we convert this ancient measure to our American system of distances, we get a colossal depth of about 140 feet below the Earth's surface. The text on the clay tablet clearly and unambiguously indicates that this massive structure was located directly beneath the very first temple of the god Enki. This specific temple was historically and geographically situated in the ancient city of Eridu, which was located in the very south of modern-day Iraq. This means that the drawing depicts an underground chamber carved deep beneath the oldest known city on our planet. Today, the city of Eridu is a massive mound of sand and dust rising above a flat, lifeless desert. It is located about 14 miles southwest of the ancient city of Ur, in a region where summer temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit. This massive mound, known to locals as Tel Abu Shahrain, covers an area of several dozen acres. The hill's surface layer consists of crumbling mud bricks that have been eroded for thousands of years by harsh winds. Beneath these surface walls lies the very core of the ancient settlement, which extends deep into the bedrock of the primordial sand. The connection between a small plaque in Philadelphia and a massive sandhill in Iraq is direct and well documented. The museum plaque describes a specific architectural detail that must be hidden deep underground at the very center of this ancient mound. The hill in Eridu contains layers of temples built one on top of another over the course of millennia. The clay drawing refers to the very first base level of this architectural stack, which is incredibly difficult to reach. In essence, we are dealing with a detailed plan of an underground chamber drawn up thousands of years before the advent of modern archaeology. This is where a fundamental question arises, one that forces us to take a fresh look at the entire history of early architecture. Why would an administrative center need to create a precise engineering blueprint of a deep underground chamber located in another city? This is not just an abstract drawing, but a diagram with precise mathematical proportions and a specific depth of 140 feet indicated. We must ask ourselves why ancient engineers needed to dig such a deep reservoir beneath the temple's foundation. And most importantly, what exactly was supposed to be stored in this isolated space at such a great depth? To attempt to answer this question, we need to turn to the physical reality of the excavations at the site itself. For a long time, Eridu Hill remained untouched, as excavations in this harsh climate required colossal efforts. Just to break through the upper layers of sand required moving millions of pounds of soil by hand. The logistics of supplying workers with water and provisions in the desert made any expedition here an incredibly expensive undertaking. It was not until the mid-20th century that archaeologists finally decided to excavate this mound and see what lay at its base. This massive undertaking was entrusted to a special expedition organized by the Iraqi Directorate of Antiquities. In the late 1940s, two prominent researchers, Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd, brought a huge team of workers to the desert. They decided to cut a deep vertical trench straight through the center of the temple mound to study all its layers. The researchers planned to reach the mainland sand itself in order to document absolutely every stage of the site's construction. Each level discovered was carefully measured, photographed, and recorded in the expedition's official reports. Archaeologists methodically removed layer after layer, uncovering the ruins of increasingly ancient temples as they dug deeper. They confirmed that the city was indeed the oldest in the region and found numerous artifacts confirming its status. The trench grew deeper, the walls of the excavation were reinforced, and workers hauled thousands of pounds of broken pottery and bricks to the surface. It seemed that the expedition was on the verge of reaching the very first foundation and verifying the data from the clay blueprint. But just as they approached the most intriguing level, something unexpected happened. Official records state that large-scale work at the site was suddenly halted, and the most important part of the mound remained unexcavated. The trench was left to the elements, and over the past decades it has been partially buried by desert sand. We were left with a plan from the Pennsylvania Museum promising a chamber 140 feet deep and an unfinished excavation. I stared at that cuneiform diagram for a very long time before I allowed myself to ask one obvious question. If the ancient text gives us precise coordinates and depth, why don't we just go down there and check? The Safara and Lloyd expedition, which took place from 1946 to 1949, is the cornerstone of our knowledge of ancient Eridu. Over the course of those 3 grueling seasons, archaeologists were able to identify and catalog 19 distinct architectural layers within the mound. Each layer represented the remains of a separate temple that had been built on the ruins of a previous structure. When the workers reached the 19th level, they discovered a small building made of unfired bricks, which stood on a layer of clean sand. Official science asserts that this 19th layer marks the absolute beginning of Eridu's history, beneath which there are no further man-made structures. The academic community attributes the sudden halt of excavations in 1949 to 2 very specific factors. The first and most important factor was a lack of funding, as the Iraqi government cut budgets for archaeology following the difficult post-war years. The second factor was reaching the water table, which made further deepening of the trench technically impossible at the time. Muddy water began seeping into the excavation, threatening to erode the fragile mud brick walls of the ancient temple on the 19th level. The expedition leaders decided to halt work so as not to destroy what they had already unearthed with such great effort. This interpretation is well-founded and deserves deep respect for the pioneers' work. Excavations in the deserts of the Middle East require enormous financial costs for logistics, security, and the wages of hundreds of workers. The use of powerful water pumps to drain groundwater in 1949 was an extremely expensive and complex process beyond the means of this mission. Furthermore, the unfired clay bricks from which these ancient walls are built literally dissolve in standing water. Halting excavations to preserve artifacts already found is standard and proper practice in classical archaeology. No serious scholar would risk the collapse of multi-ton walls at the excavation site for the sake of a faint hope of finding something deeper than ground level. Safar and Lloyd did the best that the technology of their era allowed and compiled brilliant reports on their work. They documented the evolution of temple architecture from a small chapel to a massive ziggurat that towered over the plain. Their conclusion that only clean, pristine sand lay below the 19th layer was based on a visual inspection of the bottom of the trench. For many decades, this conclusion was considered an indisputable fact that found its way into all textbooks on the history of Mesopotamia. But this logical and straightforward picture does not at all explain the data obtained in our own century. In 2002, a team of geophysicists conducted a local radar scan of the area adjacent to the unexcavated part of the hill. The ground-penetrating radar, which sends electromagnetic pulses deep into the ground and records their reflections, revealed something that does not fit the official theory. The device detected a massive density anomaly with distinct geometric outlines and right angles. This structure is not a natural geological formation, as nature does not create perfect squares in loose sand. The most important aspect of this discovery lies in the precise figures provided by the instruments after processing the GPR signals. The upper boundary of this dense square anomaly lies at a depth of exactly 140 feet from the modern surface of the burial mound. This is precisely the depth of 20 Ninda indicated on the cuneiform tablet CBS 8513 from the Pennsylvania Museum. The radar scan physically confirmed the presence of a large object where, according to the 1949 archaeologists, there should be nothing but sand. And this anomaly is located directly beneath the spot where the first temple of the 19th level stood, exactly as described in the ancient text. Mainstream science has encountered a direct physical contradiction between old reports and new instrumental data. If the 19th layer is indeed the end of the settlement, then the radar should have shown only a homogeneous structure of bedrock. However, the scan clearly highlights voids or areas with radically different material densities that form a closed contour. The size of this contour is too large to be a random cluster of rocks or a natural lens of compacted clay. We are dealing with an object that exhibits clear signs of artificial origin and is located at a great depth. Proponents of the conventional theory usually ignore the results of this scan or attribute them to technical errors in the equipment. They claim that groundwater can distort the radar signal, creating so-called false echo patterns on the screens. But water does not form neat squares in the ground with clearly defined internal depressions that match ancient drawings. Even if we allow for the possibility of a technical error, it is standard practice in modern science to verify such anomalies using physical methods. Drilling a narrow test borehole to this depth and taking a core sample is relatively inexpensive, but this has not yet been done. It is precisely here that the official explanation begins to crack, revealing the system's reluctance to re-examine established dogmas. A lack of funds in 1949 perfectly explains why Safar and Lloyd stopped at the 19th layer of the temple. But this in no way explains why, in 2026, with modern non-destructive technologies available, this section of the hill remains untouched. No university has applied for drilling in the radar anomaly zone to settle this matter once and for all. The decision to classify the site as fully explored takes precedence over the desire to investigate new physical data. To understand the nature of this anomaly, we need to examine the CBS 8513 tablet itself more closely. It is currently located in the United States. This artifact was not found in Eridu itself, but during excavations by the University of Pennsylvania in the ancient city of Nippur. The excavations took place at the very end of the 19th century, and the fragment was extracted from a layer dating to the beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE. Nippur was located more than 100 miles north of Eridu and served as the main religious and scientific center of Mesopotamia. What we hold in our hands is a copy of an ancient archive, carefully transcribed by Nippurian scholars. Mainstream science interprets this drawing exclusively as a mythological representation of the cosmic order. Scholars believe that the lines on the clay symbolize the structure of the universe, where the square depression signifies the primordial ocean. Academics claim that the numbers and measurements were added by the scribes solely to give this religious symbol more weight. In their view, ancient priests simply visualized their abstract ideas about how the gods structured chaos. This position rejects any possibility that the document describes a real engineering project in the physical world. This explanation is consistent. It is also universally applicable, as a way to never have to ask whether a claim is true. If we declare any complex drawing to be a religious symbol in advance, we do not need to look for its physical embodiment on Earth. But this position completely ignores the fact that Nippur was a city of mathematicians, astronomers, and builders, not merely mystics. Hundreds of tablets containing solutions to complex geometric problems and calculations of earthwork volumes have been found in the city's archives. The scribes of Nippur used precise technical language, and there is not a single mention of gods or incantations on tablet CBS 8513. The text on the artifact uses the term Kigal, which literally translates as great place or large foundation. Next to it is the precise figure of 20 ninda, specifying the depth at which this foundation is to be laid. One ninda in the Sumerian system of length is approximately 19.5 American feet, which can easily be verified by other construction texts. Multiplying 20 by 19.5, we arrive at that very mark of 390 feet, or about 140 feet if we take the temple's summit as the reference point. This is not abstract philosophy, but a rigorous mathematical formula tied to specific units of measurement in the physical world. The presence of such a precise engineering document in the archives of another city suggests the existence of centralized planning. If Eridu was the very first city, then the blueprints of its basic structures must have been kept in the main scientific center as a treasure of the highest order. The priests of Nippur copied this diagram not to worship it, but to preserve knowledge of the technologies of the past. The fact that the 2002 radar scan detected an anomaly precisely at this calculated depth elevates the tablet from the realm of myth to that of a geodetic map. And this compels us to take a completely fresh look at exactly what the archaeologists discovered in their trench. The physical trench cut by Safar and Lloyd is still visible in satellite images of Tel Abu Shahrain. This massive cut in the ground is several hundred feet long and descends in huge steps. For 3 years, workers carried out baskets of soil from there, totaling over 2,400,000 pounds. They methodically excavated one level after another, carefully sketching every brick they found and every broken vase. Their goal was to reach the very bottom, to the moment when human civilization had only just begun to build this city. When they reached the 19th layer, they found a tiny structure only about 10 feet wide. Inside this structure was a small altar and a pedestal covered with a thick layer of ash and fish bones. The expedition's official report states that this is the very first sanctuary built by primitive fishermen on a sand dune. Below this structure, archaeologists found only clean sand, which they considered to be the natural continental bedrock. Based on this, a sweeping conclusion was drawn that the history of monumental architecture on the planet began precisely with this small hut. This position seems logical if one relies solely on a visual inspection of the bottom of the excavation site under the conditions of 1949. The building does indeed stand on a flat layer of sand that visually differs in no way from the surrounding desert. Early builders often erected their sanctuaries on natural elevations to protect them from spring floods. Safar and Lloyd had no reason to doubt that this sand constituted the bottom of the historical stratum. Their conclusion was sincere and based on the data they could obtain using shovels and pickaxes. But there is one serious inconsistency in this otherwise flawless academic report, which becomes apparent upon a detailed examination of the trench plans. The 19th temple, despite its small size, is built of standard-sized bricks and has precisely squared corners. The walls of this primitive sanctuary are strictly oriented to the cardinal directions, which requires deep knowledge of astronomy and geodesy. Building a structure of this quality requires centuries of prior experience, which primitive fishermen on a dune simply could not have had. This building does not look like the beginning of architectural evolution, but rather like the tip of an iceberg, beneath which something more complex is hidden. If we look at the trench plan, we see that the sand beneath the 19th layer is not a natural formation. The thickness of this sand layer is too uniform, and it lacks the typical natural impurities characteristic of this region. It looks as though ancient builders deliberately covered some kind of structure with a huge amount of purified sand to create a level platform. And if this hypothesis is correct, then the trench did not stop at the bottom of the city, but at the protective cover of a huge underground reservoir. This completely changes the meaning of what we are accustomed to calling the first temple on Earth. The key to understanding what lies beneath the sand is hidden in the very word Abzu, which is written on the Pennsylvania tablet. This word appears in dozens of ancient cuneiform texts, the most complete of which are now housed in the British Museum in London. In famous epics such as the Enuma Elish, Abzu is described as the abode of the god Enki, lord of wisdom and underground waters. The texts state that this god created his dwelling deep below, locking it with strong bolts and shielding it from the outside world. It was there, according to legend, that the so-called Mi were kept. Physical tablets or objects containing the blueprints for all of civilization's technologies. Conventional scholarship traditionally translates the term Abzu as a mythological freshwater ocean upon which the flat Earth floats. Researchers believe that the ancient Sumerians simply personified the groundwater that gave life to their fields. In this paradigm, the god Enki is a metaphor for water, and his underground dwelling is merely an aquifer. Academics insist that the descriptions of doors, locks, and walls in the texts are a poetic device with no connection to reality. For them, Abzu is an abstract concept of fertility that cannot be found using archaeological tools. This interpretation seems quite reasonable if one considers the myths in isolation from the physical ruins. Water was indeed the most valuable resource in arid Mesopotamia, and its deification was a natural process for the ancient mind. Poetic descriptions of natural phenomena are common in the literature of early societies that sought to make sense of the world's order. Endowing underground springs with the attributes of a royal palace may have been a way to exalt if one reads the text merely as fairy tales, the theory of the mythological ocean holds up perfectly. However, this convenient theory completely collapses when we begin to read texts describing the specific construction process at Eridu. A tablet from the British Museum, catalog number BM93014, contains the text Enki's Journey to Nippur, which describes the construction of an Abzu. The text does not describe a natural water source. It describes a physical construction project requiring a vast amount of materials. It states verbatim, "He built his house of silver and lapis lazuli. He set massive copper doors at its entrance. An ocean does not need copper doors, hinges, and locks that weigh hundreds of pounds each. Moreover, The ancient author specifies the exact quantities of precious metals and heavy stones that were delivered to the construction site. The documents list ingots of gold and silver, the total weight of which exceeded several thousand pounds. These materials were not thrown into the well as part of a religious ritual. They were used to line the walls deep underground. The text describes the Abzu as a fortified bunker or a protected storage facility, not as a shapeless mass of water in the sand. When these physical descriptions are superimposed on the radar anomaly and the drawing from Pennsylvania, the picture becomes too specific to be a mere myth. The 2002 radar scan data is the very physical evidence that brings this story from the realm of texts into reality. The study was conducted using powerful equipment capable of penetrating the thickness of the sand and scanning the density of objects at great depths. The radar units moved across the surface of the hill, sending out beams of electromagnetic waves and recording the time of their return. When a wave encounters a high-density object, such as a stone wall or a metal plate, the signal reflects differently than it does from sand. A computer program processes these signals and constructs a three-dimensional map of structures hidden underground. When geophysicists processed the scan data of the area beneath the Temple of Eridu, they obtained a clear picture of a dense, geometrically regular structure. The anomaly consists of a closed square contour with sides over 40 feet long, within which a sharp drop in density is observed. This means that the instruments detected massive walls surrounding a space that is either empty or filled with a lighter material. The corners of this square are right angles, and its edges are strictly parallel to the walls of the surface temples excavated by Safar and Lloyd. Nature is incapable of creating such symmetrical forms in the heterogeneous soil of the desert. Mainstream science has chosen to ignore this inconvenient data or dismiss it as a random fluctuation in the equipment. Critics argue that layers of compacted clay are common in the desert and can distort radio signals, creating false contours. They point out that the groundwater that halted excavations in 1949 could have accumulated in a square shape due to geological faults. In academic circles, it is not customary to revise basic theories based on remote sensing data until the object has been excavated manually. Therefore, the 2002 results were published in highly specialized journals and quickly forgotten. Radar data in conditions of high soil moisture can indeed be unstable and require careful interpretation. Layers of clay saturated with mineralized water sometimes act as mirrors for electromagnetic waves, creating mirages on instrument screens. Any experienced geophysicist will confirm that remote sensing provides only a probability of an object's presence, not a 100% guarantee. Questioning scan results before conducting physical tests is a normal and necessary process in any scientific research. But what exactly is the main problem with this convenient skeptical stance? It lies in the precise depth of this square anomaly, a depth that could not possibly be a mere coincidence. The upper edge of this structure was detected by radar at exactly 140 feet below the surface of the modern mound. This is the very same 20 Ninda mark that was carved on a clay tablet in Nippur millennia ago. A geological fault, or a random accumulation of clay, cannot coincidentally match the precise mathematical calculations of an ancient engineer. We are dealing with a structure that was planned, built, and documented, and which is still waiting to be discovered. If we piece all these scattered fragments of data together, we get a picture that demands immediate investigation. We have a specific set of physical clues, each of which can be challenged individually, but together they form a clear pattern. These clues come from various sources, from a Philadelphia museum, from London archives, from 1949 reports, and from modern computers. They converge at a single geographic point on a map of southern Iraq, directly beneath the unexcavated portion of the Eridu mound, and they all point to the existence of a structure that should not exist according to the current historical paradigm. An engineering drawing in Pennsylvania indicating a depth of 140 feet is a documented fact. The sudden halt of excavations at the 19th layer, directly above the calculated zone, is a documented fact. The 2002 radar anomaly, showing a perfect square at exactly that depth, is a documented fact. There is no official explanation as to why all three independent sources point in the same direction. Instead of seeking answers, we see a system that prefers to ignore the coincidences so as not to disrupt the established status quo. Every time the question of drilling a well in Eridu comes up, academic institutions find reasons to refuse. They cite the region's instability, budget constraints, or the need to preserve the monument for future generations with better technology. But the technology for safely drilling a 6-inch core has existed for decades and is successfully used in the oil industry in Iraq itself. The cost of such an operation is a tiny fraction of what universities spend on theoretical conferences on Sumerian mythology. Clearly, the problem lies not in technology or money, but in a reluctance to receive an answer that might prove inconvenient. If there really is a protected bunker lined with heavy metals at a depth of 140 feet, then the entire chronology of civilization's development is incorrect. This means that so-called primitive fishermen possess technologies of deep drilling, waterproofing, and metallurgy that surpassed the capabilities of the 19th century. This confirms that texts about ancient repositories of knowledge are not mere poetry, but inventory lists of real objects. And it is precisely this fear of having to rewrite all the textbooks that compels the system to classify the issue before investigating it. Today, the Tel Abu Shahrain mound continues to slowly crumble under the scorching sun and desert winds. The massive trench dug by Safar and Lloyd is partially buried in sand, obscuring access to the 19th layer of the temple. Tourists rarely make it to this site, and the few expeditions that do come focus only on preserving the already excavated surface walls. The most important archaeological site in the world remains 80% buried, guarding its greatest secret. We stand on the threshold of the greatest discovery, yet we refuse to take the final step. All these debates, radar charts, and academic battles bring us back to the quiet hall of the University Museum in Pennsylvania. The light from the display case falls softly on the clay surface of tablet CBS 8513, illuminating every cuneiform stroke. This small piece of fired clay has survived the fall of empires, millennia under the sand, and long decades in archival boxes. It contains a message that was deliberately encoded in mathematical proportions so that it could be read across time. The outline of the central square and the word Abzu remain clearly legible, awaiting the moment when someone decides to verify their physical accuracy. The dimensions of 20 ninda, converted to 140 feet, have not changed since the scribe's stylus left the wet clay. They are fixed in a material that cannot be altered or edited to suit new historical theories. This is physical evidence that ancient builders thought in terms of three-dimensional space and precise engineering. The tablet requires no belief in gods or spirits. It requires only an understanding of geometry and the ability to work with measuring instruments. It is a direct challenge to our arrogance and our confidence that we know everything about the past. Official science looks at this and sees a primitive religious myth about an underground ocean. I look and see a precise architectural blueprint of a forgotten bunker. Perhaps this is a far-fetched conclusion based on a series of incredible coincidences. Maybe it is exactly what it looks like. Instructions for locating a specific object. The answer lies there, beneath the layers of sand in Eridu, sealed and untouched since the dawn of human civilization. That tablet now lies in a glass display case at a museum in Philadelphia,